So I want to go backwards just a minute from Sabina and talk about a couple of the flashpoints in the past that have kind of brought us to this point, and ask you to comment at least on these two. One being Scarborough Shoal, and I realize it's going to take you back a dozen years, but I think it's important in the context of what we're talking about today. And if you could help us understand its role in the overall story. And then, of course, Second Thomas Shoal, which is what everyone was talking about a year ago and even maybe 6 months ago, but all of a sudden everything has now moved to Sabina. Can you just walk us through those two circumstances?
Okay, so Scarborough Shoal, to kind of arrange our geography here, you have two big island groups in the South China Sea. The Paracels up in the north, the Spratlys down in the south. Scarborough Shoal is neither of those. Scarborough Shoal is an underwater reef, a couple of rocks that stick above water at high tide, about 120 or so miles off the coast of Luzon, the main Philippine island. Historically, was treated as part of the U.S. When the U.S. Was the colonial power of the Philippines, and then became part of the Philippines in 1946 upon independence, and was administered by the Philippines uncontested for generations. In 2012, kind of out of the blue, China deployed members of its militia force out of the village of Tanmen in Hainan to go to Scarborough Shoal. They had been, by the way, poaching at Scarborough for about the last 20 years, but in this case, they were very specifically sent to pick a fight. They went to Scarborough, began poaching endangered species, among other things. The Philippines deployed a Navy ship to try to arrest them, as it had done many, many times in the past, in the case of Chinese poachers. And China used that excuse to deploy its law enforcement. And that begins this months-long standoff, where you've got basically Philippine vessels inside the shoal trying to hold on to these Chinese poachers, Chinese vessels ringing it so the Philippines can't get in or out. And then over a series of unclear, murky negotiations, including one here in Northern Virginia between then Assistant Secretary of State Kurt Campbell and Fu Ying, who was at the time the National Assembly chair in China. The U.S. and the Philippines think they have a deal for both sides to withdraw back to the status quo ante. Chinese forces would pull out, Philippine forces would pull out, and that would be the end of it. The Filipinos pull out, and the Chinese came right back and seized the shoal, and have had a Coast Guard ship present in the lagoon of Scarborough Shoal for the last 12 years and counting, blocking for large portions of that the access of Filipino fishers who have operated there for generations. That is also, not only is that in many ways marks the beginning of this cycle of escalation, because it's what prompted the Philippines less than a year later to file its arbitration case against China in the Permanent Court of Arbitration, which it would eventually win. And that was the proximate cause for China's island building. So Scarborough Shoal was in many ways the spark that lit this fire. It also has become a weight, an albatross around the neck of the U.S.-Philippine alliance, because it is widely viewed in the Philippines as a U.S. failure to act, or at the very least, a failure to recognize China's intentions. The more cynical view is that the U.S. didn't think the Philippines was worth standing up for. And the more forgiving view would be that the U.S. got taken for a ride by China. Either way, it didn't reflect very well on the alliance. And that's a legacy that we are still trying to dig out from under today. As for Second Thomas is another random reef, completely underwater, on the continental shelf and within the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. It was awarded to the Philippines by the 2016 arbitration. The Philippines has maintained a very small military outpost on it since 1999, when it intentionally grounded an old World War II era tank landing ship, the BRP Sierra Madre. And China has from time to time tried to starve them out of that outpost. For whatever reason, China finds that outpost particularly symbolically frustrating. In spring 2022, China all of a sudden began doing this more regularly. And by 2023, China was trying to block every Philippine resupply mission to the Sierra Madre, which prompted the Philippines to run these blockades until the end of last year. You had roughly 100 ships on station during some of these resupply runs. One reason China was clearly trying to block them is because the Philippines was bringing in construction materials that whole time, because early in the Marcos administration in 2022, the Philippines had surveyed the ship and discovered that it was in pretty bad shape. So the Philippine goal was to repair the ship. China's goal was to stop that. As of June, it appears that the Philippines had succeeded in repairing the ship. And thus, in July, China and the Philippines were able to negotiate what they call a provisional arrangement to allow the normal resupply. And neither side's going to say this publicly, but this was a tactical victory for the Philippines. They achieved their goals, and China did not.